conflict between Israel and Palestine is complicated and seems completely stuck. What is it like to be a peace activist in a conflict that has been going on for so long and with no solution in sight? What new perspectives can a theologian offer in analyzing the situation? What is the role of religion? Is it helpful, or is it rather making matters worse? And can religion and politics in this particular situation be separated at all? These questions and many more will be addressed by our guest of tonight, and we're very happy that he is here, Reverend Dr. Mitri Raheb. He is a Palestinian theologian. He's a peace activist. He used to be, I just learned, the pastor of the Christmas church in Bethlehem. He is the founder of the Dar al-Kalima University College for Arts and Culture, and he has written many books, among which Faith in the Face of Empire, which has been translated in Dutch and is called Geloven onder bezetting. In a minute, he will give a lecture of about 40 minutes, and after that, he will talk the matter through in further detail with scholar of religion Helene Meuren van den Berg. And she is based at her own university, and her field of research is, among others, the position of Christian minorities in the Middle East. Of course, after the discussion, there will also be ample time for your own questions. My name is Liesbeth Jansen. I work as a program manager for Radboud Reflects, and I'll be your host tonight. Thank you for coming. I'm very happy that you're all here. Yeah, that's it. I'm happy to give the floor to Mitri Raheb.
Good evening, and thank you for coming tonight here for this lecture. I'm glad to see all of you, and I look forward later to engage in a discussion. The Holy Land, a question mark. You know what I love in this title is the question mark. Because as somebody who comes from Palestine, from Bethlehem, whenever people use the word Holy Land, I know most of the time they want to avoid the issue. So they don't want to call things by name, so they used a religious title. And so sometimes the religious title is really not helpful. But thank you for putting it there, because you gave me, the excuse to say this to start with. And actually, tonight is the ending of the Yom Kippur. I see we have some Jewish friends here, so Chag Sameach. And you know that one of the wars in 73 took place actually around this time. And if you look at that war, and I will come later to that, you can see even that war has so many religious connotations. And this really brings us into the topic today. How can we look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? I'm not sure I'm going to give you a fresh insight, but I'm going to give you at least an insight into how I see things happening in our part of the world. And I hope this works. Okay, that's it. Because as somebody really who comes from Palestine, who's a Christian and who's a theologian, I grew up and was pastor for 30 years. Every day I was reading the newspaper, and every day I was reading the Bible, and often you cannot bring both together, and sometimes you can. And so I will share with you some of this insight as a contextual theologian. And the contextual theologian doesn't start with the Bible, but starts with reality. And so in the first part, actually, I'm going to talk about the political situation, the context in which we live as Palestinians today in the West Bank. I will come in the second part to talk about the role of religion in the conflict, a bit more extensively. I will talk about the role of the Christian community in Palestine today. And I will end, since we are here in a university setting, and I'm the founder and president of Dar al-Kalima University College of Arts and Culture. I was asked, actually, why not to say something about your university? This might be interesting for our students here and professors. So I will say a bit about that. So all of this in 40 minutes, okay? So let me start with the political situation. And maybe, I guess you are familiar with this map. If you look to the left, you have the map of historic Palestine, 1946. What you see in green was land owned by Palestinians at that time, 46. The white spots were areas owned by the Jewish population, who were Palestinians, because, I mean, Jews, Christians, and Muslims until 1948 were all Palestinians, part of Mandate Palestine. And if you look 1 year later, the UN suggested to divide Palestine into two, giving the Jewish population who owned 5% of the land, giving them 52% of the land, and giving the Palestinian Arab population 48% of the land. If you were Palestinians at that time, you would have thought this is unfair. But actually, this division of Palestine had to do somehow with race and religion. And this was actually the politics of the British. You know, the British didn't, I mean, not only the British, but all the empires who came in the last 200 years in the Middle East, even the French, who you think are very secular, their politics in the region was sectarian, always sectarian. And so the British thought it's not a good idea for Jews, Christians, and Muslims to live together. We have to divide them. And so, 1928, just to give you as an example, in Jerusalem there was one municipality. There were Jews, Christians, and Muslims represented there, elected. The British came and said, it's not good to have one municipality. Let's divide into two, one Jewish and one Arab. The Arab was Christians and Muslims, and the Jewish was Jewish. They put the Jewish in West Jerusalem, and they assigned East Jerusalem for the Arabs. If you want to laugh or to cry, I'm not sure. In 1948, we had one hospital in Jerusalem for the lepers. You know the lepers? There were still lepers in Palestine at that time. In this hospital were Christian, Jews, and Muslims. The British entered the hospital and say Jewish lepers should go to West Jerusalem and Arab lepers should go to Silwan. And this is what happened. So you can see actually how empires, in this case Britain, were part of the problem. But 1947, this was a bit over 70 years ago, and there were some actually Jewish researchers 2 years ago for the 70th anniversary looking into who drew this map for the UN. I mean, somebody must have. He wasn't Dutch, so relax. Okay? He was a Swede, a PK. You know what PK is? A pastor's kid. And so it seems that, you know, this pastor's kid was somehow influenced by theology to draw such a map, which usually we don't see it this way when we look at the map. But again, you can see how religion actually, even in drafting a map like this, can play a role. Anyhow, 1948, Israel took over 77% of historic Palestine, leaving two parts divided. The West Bank came under Jordanian rule in 49, and Gaza came under Egyptian rule. And if you look today at the map as is today, you can see that actually not much is left of Palestine. Less than 10% of the land of historic Palestine is under Palestinian control. Israel controls, either by military means or other means, over 90% of historic Palestine. But what this map does not show, the one to the right, is that today in historic Palestine we have more or less 6.5 million Jewish people and 6.5 million Palestinian Arab people. So we have two groups, same size, equal size, but unequal distribution of land. And this is exactly the crux of the problem. The crux of the problem is land and who controls the land. And, you know, sometimes, again, I guess there are Christian Zionists sometimes who might say, you know, it was God who promised Israel the land. Talking about the state of Israel. And I always like to remind them, it wasn't the Lord God, it was the Lord Balfour, 1917, who promised Israel the land. And there is a big difference between the Lord God and the Lord Balfour, because the one represents God, the other represents the empire. So keep this in mind as we go. Okay, so let's zoom in a bit into the West Bank. This is where I come from. And if you look there, I hope this helps. Yeah. This is Bethlehem. This is where I was born. This is where I grew up. This is where I have been working for the last 30 plus years. This is Jerusalem here, and this is Ramallah, just for your... and what you see in violet, this is all a land fully under Israeli military control. So Palestinians have no control over it. The brown slots, this is here, this is here. This is what is really under full Palestinian control, more or less, not even full. So we have a president. The president actually controls these small brown slots, and all others, they have a joint control. And what you see in turquoise, this is the green. These are actually Jewish settlements built inside the West Bank. If you like, colonies. And if you look at them exactly, you can see there are two vertical lines of Jewish settlements in the West Bank, and there are three horizontal lines of settlement. So if you look at it, this makes like a grid. Now, this concept is not a new concept. This concept, actually, it was the Prime Minister Sharon, the former and late Prime Minister of Israel, who went to South Africa, actually, to copy this program. He was interested, how do the white there control the black people? And he came with this and implemented it in Palestine. And the idea behind it was to make sure that there is no Palestinian state can ever actually be developing in this part of historic Palestine. And then came the wall, 2003, and you can see here, for example, how the wall and, to some extent, a fence carved so deep into the West Bank. It doesn't make sense. So why is it like this? Because here we have the largest underground water aquifer in the West Bank. And Israel wants to keep the water on their side of the wall. Again, this is Bethlehem, and Bethlehem is the second most affected city by the wall. And this is where half of the Palestinian Christian community lives. So if I want to talk about the Christian community, I cannot talk about the Christian community without talking about what's happening here. The most affected city by the wall in the West Bank is this city called Qalqilia. And if we were to look at it from the air, this is how it looks like. These are the Palestinian homes of Qalqilia. And can you see the wall? This is a 9-meter high wall, actually, surrounding the whole town of Qalqilia, with around 50,000 people living there. And Netanyahu, in his election campaign, he actually announced that he would like to annex the whole Jordan Valley, which looks like this, which would leave the West Bank like this. But then you have all the settlers, the settlements he would like to incorporate in Israel. So not much actually will be left from the West Bank. So now let's zoom into Bethlehem. Look at this section. This is the Bethlehem Governorate. So 1967, I was at that time 5 years old when Israel occupied Bethlehem, and I have still some childhood memories of that. This was the boundaries of Bethlehem at that time. So you had here East Jerusalem, you had here Hebron, the Green Line, and the Dead Sea. I'm sure many of you have floated on the Dead Sea, but I'm sure nobody knew that this is Bethlehem water because it's under Israeli control. But this is according to 1967 borders. It's Palestinian Bethlehem water. So look what happened to our city in the last 50 years. First, Israel annexed the northern part of Bethlehem and declared it part of Jerusalem. So we lost this part. And then in the first 40 years or so, Israel built 19 settlements on Palestinian Bethlehem land. If we look where they were built, here to the north, southwest. Why southwest? Because this is the most fertile area in the Bethlehem region. In the Bible, Bethlehem is called Ephrata. If you think of the book of Micah 5:2, Ephrata means the fruitful. Because we have the mountain range coming from north to south, and rain comes from west, northwest, and so the rain stays on this side of the mountain. This is desert, this is lush. And then you have Jewish settlements along the Dead Sea. Why? Because they control tourism and they control the minerals of the sea. And then you have 4 settlements like here in the middle of nowhere. Why are they here? Because we have here the second largest water aquifer in the West Bank is located here. And we have archaeological sites. Herodion is located just here. And so these are not by chance here. Now, this is exactly what Netanyahu would annex if he will do what he just announced a month ago. He will annex all this area that you see here and all of this area that you see in blue. And right now, this area is called military zone, which means it's not only that the Palestinians have no control of it, it's not even allowed for us to be there. If I go there, they can put me to prison. And this area of the Bethlehem region is called Natural Reserve. It's supposed to be a nature reserve for the Palestinians. They cannot do anything there, but it should be nature reserve, which is great because we need reserve. But most probably, these 4 Jewish settlements are meant to grow later as big as this. And then Israel built 2 so-called bypass roads. These are roads that bypass Palestinian towns but connect Jewish settlements together. And in this case, actually, they have a different function because we are not allowed anymore to build west of this road, nor are we allowed to build east of this road. In fact, I'm not allowed to drive with my car, even this is Bethlehem, on this section of the road or on this section of the road. So there are two road systems in the West Bank, depending if you are Israeli, Jewish Israeli, or if you are Palestinian. More settlements, they keep expanding. And then came the wall. This is the wall to the north. And you can see this is the wall to the west, built along the road. And this map is a bit old, so now there is a wall here, and there is a wall here. So basically, Bethlehem now is surrounded from three sides by this ugly wall. And remember, this is from here to here is less than 3 kilometers. So the confined city, you can imagine how small that is. And so if you want to drive now within the city, you can be stuck. Yesterday, just driving from our university to our home, which is less than half a kilometer, it took me like half an hour because, we cannot build ring roads because everything around Bethlehem is taken away. More barriers, more checkpoints. And this is the blue. If I go back, now you can see it. The blue, this was the projection of settlement expansion projected. And so you can see lots of settlement expansion here. But even more dangerous, can you see this set of settlements surrounding Bethlehem from the east? So basically, if you take the so-called Area C, which it's 66%, you add to that the 20% nature reserve, which we cannot do anything about it. 86% of Bethlehem Governorate is not under our control. That's the reality. And as a theologian, I cannot just close my eyes and say hallelujah without looking at the reality. So, basically, Bethlehem is a strangled city. And what does this mean? Politically, absence of freedom. If I want to go from Bethlehem to Jerusalem, I need a permit. And these are just 8 kilometers. Imagine you are an architect. I'm not sure if you have your architects, and you need to do a town planning where you cannot start new neighborhood. You cannot expand the boundaries of your town because everything around you, there are 22 Jewish settlements who have taken all the land. How can you do town planning? So everyone is building up higher and higher. And so the whole character of the little town of Bethlehem is changing. Economically, if a city cannot expand, it means it's doomed to have more and more unemployed people. Right now, the unemployment rate in Bethlehem is the highest in the West Bank, 24.6%. Socially, if you look people in, you can imagine you will have more tensions, more crimes, and more drugs. Psychologically, imagine you have kids who grew up without knowing how spring smells like or looks like. Today, driving through Netherlands, and it's not even spring, it's autumn. My colleague was telling me all the time, look how green it is, look how green it is. Because you come from an area where no green is left on our side of the wall. For Christians, it means migration. People say, why bother? I mean, looking at my history, my grandfather was born under Ottoman occupation. My mother was born under British occupation. My kids are born under Israeli occupation. And you ask yourself, how long, O Lord? And so many Christians think, it doesn't make sense to stay. And so the bottom line, it's a deteriorating quality of life. And this is not a tsunami. This is not a natural catastrophe. This is not an earthquake. This is a man-made, catastrophe. So if you really want to understand what's happening overall in the West Bank today looks like a piece of a Swiss cheese, Emmentaler cheese. Basically, Israel gets the cheese, that's the land and the resources, and the Palestinians are pushed in the holes with no living and surviving conditions. And just, to give you an idea what I mean with occupation, because people think always of military occupation, but Israel occupation is more. Israel occupies the land. We saw that in the map. But it also controls the resources. We talked about water. We have oil in the Mediterranean that we cannot use, minerals of the Dead Sea, stone quarries, everything is... So everything, the land and everything underneath is controlled by Israel, but also archaeological sites and treasures in the West Bank. I mean, if you are a theologian, you know of the Qumran, for example, rolls, right? The Qumran is in the West Bank. But the Qumran rolls are at the Israel Museum in Israel, which is against international law, just to give you one example. But also Israel controls air, aviation, electromagnetic fields. So basically, it took us 5 years with the American interference. I went 3 times to Washington, D.C. with the business community to push Congress, to push Israel to allow us to have a 3G technology. You know 3G, which is now obsolete. And so Israel allowed the Palestinian companies to have a 3G just last year when the 3G was obsolete. The same company that operates in Palestine, it's called Ooredoo, already offers 5G, which maybe you don't have here, in Qatar. But they are not allowed to offer more than 3G in Palestine. So you can understand occupation is more. The borders, all of that is controlled by others. So is there a solution? You know, people usually talk about a 2-state solution. There is like international consensus about a 2-state solution, one for Israel and one for Palestine. But more and more people thinking maybe it's too late for a 2-state solution. And so more and more people are talking about a 1-state solution, you know, 1 person, 1 vote. The problem, it's too late for a 2-state solution, maybe, but it is definitely too early for a 1-state solution because the international consensus is still with 2-state solution. And this is our problem. Too late, too early, we are stuck there. One can think of federation, confederation, Swiss model, not the Swiss cheese, but, you know, like cantons where you have, you know, different identities. These are the only 5 solutions. There is no 6th solution. If none of these solutions is implemented, which is unfortunately the case right now, you end up with what we call occupation, which is a systemic oppression. That's what we have right now. So we need really to understand the context before we come to speak about the role of religion in the conflict, which is now my second part. And, you know, let me start here with the larger context, not only Israel-Palestine, but the whole area. And if you look at the whole area, actually, and there are scholarly investigations done, our whole area actually ranks last when it comes to unhealthy relationship between religion and the state. Here in the Netherlands, I guess you talk about separation of religion and state. It's more and more secularized. There, actually, it's not. So, for example, in all 20 Arab states in the Middle East, there is no separation between religion and state. And 17 of these 20 countries declare that the religion of the state, as if state can have religion, is Islam. 6 countries forbid minority religion, and 1 country does not allow the practice of any other religion. In this case, it's Saudi Arabia. And 3 regional powers define themselves as religious states. And here maybe you are shocked, because we are talking about Saudi Arabia, we are talking about Iran, and guess what? We are talking about Israel, who declares it's a Jewish state, and they just took a legislation in that. And this is now not my words. The latest study done just 1 month ago by Pew. Pew is one of the most credible research institutions in the US. And if you look, countries with most restrictive laws and policies toward religious freedoms, can you see Israel? It just, close to Iran, close to Saudi Arabia, and the other countries. I'm sure you never thought of it this way, but this is one way, actually, to look at it. And when we talk about religion and state, actually, the problem, I said, started with the British, because they were implementing a sectarian policy. But really, it mushrooms after 1967. 1967 was actually a very decisive moment in the history of our region. Until 1967, there was the Pan-Arabism, which is more or less a secular ideology, was dominant. Jamal Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt, incorporated actually that ideology, which actually exactly that same president lost the war in 1967. And I think in many Dutch places in 1967, especially among conservative Christians, they thought that what happened in 1967 was a miracle. God was fighting on the side of Israel against all Arab countries, and this is why Israel won the war. So they saw God actually as part of that war. If you think of that war, actually, it has lots of religious connotation. Israel called the war 6-day war. Why 6 days? God created the world in 6 days, and after that, he relaxed, right? So Israel was saying, basically, we finished the job in 60 days, and now we can relax. They didn't relax, and they didn't let us to relax. So we are both not relaxed right now. But in 1967, there was this proliferation of religious ideologies. Actually, if you look at the region, 3 ideologies mushroomed after 1967. Christian Zionism, because as I said, many Christians thought, I was in Indonesia, which was a former colony, and I met Christians, and they were saying, Pastor, in 1967, we were praying in all churches for God to give Israel victory. I mean, these are Indonesians, right? Okay. Their problem was they feel as a minority among Muslim majority, and this is why actually they identified with Israel. But think of the United States, think of even this country. And it was actually also the growth of Jewish messianism. I mean, if you were living in 1967, the most famous song in Israel was Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, Jerusalem, city of gold. And if you were to listen to these words, it says, we came to dry fountains, we came to ruins, and now we are rebuilding it. So you have that ideology, and it started the whole settlement projects, which started as a religious projects and then later became economical and political. But the first actually settlements, say in the Hebron area, etc., were Jewish Messianic settlements. And actually, if you look at what we call Islamic fundamentalists, basically it experienced 1967 really a huge push forwards because the pan-Aramism ideology was defeated in 1967, represented by Jamal Abdel Nasser, and many people thought, Islam is the solution. And so you can again see how the context actually and religion are always interrelated. We cannot actually separate them. In the Middle East, but maybe here we can talk about that later. So if you look at the role of religion again in the region, you can see that religion often was used as an anti-colonial factor. So when people, for example, were fighting the British mandate, they often would use religion, for example, Islam or other things. It has been used often in this context. But religion actually provides legitimacy. In most countries in our region, the governments got their legitimacy and what they do through religion. This is true for Saudi Arabia, for example. This is true for Iran. But this is true for even countries like Jordan, where the king, basically, it's important that he comes from the family of the Prophet. That's important for his legitimacy. But also that's important for Israel, because the colonization of the West Bank is done under religious pretext. That is actually what gives Israel right now the only legitimacy. And on the other hand, you have religion used not to stay in power and to give legitimacy to those in power, but actually to resist those in power so that you get yourself into power. And a good example here is Hamas. Hamas actually is utilizing religion against the ruling party in Palestine, which is Fatah, so that they themselves can come to power, which they achieved in this case in Gaza. So that's because, when we started working with this issue of religion and state, we thought the problem is maybe we have somehow to understand the Quran and to understand the Hebrew Bible and to understand the New Testament. And we discovered it's actually not about this. It's about power. You use religion in our region to stay in power or to get to power. That's the legitimacy that religion is giving you. And here I come again to our country. Israel just last year passed this nation-state law because, until last year, everyone knew there is discrimination even within Israel. So if you are an Ethiopian Jew, you have less actually less access, let's say it, than if you are Ashkenazi Jews. If you are Palestinian Arab Israeli, you have less access to many things. So people knew there is a de facto actually discrimination. But with this law now, the de facto discrimination became de jure. Now there is a law saying that Israel is a state where only the Jewish people can exercise their self-determination, no other one. And where the Hebrew language is the first and only official language of the state. Before it used to be Hebrew and Arabic. And so basically you exclude 20% of the population, which made people like the Druze community very angry because they serve in the Israeli military. They died for the Israeli state, and now they are considered, less equal than the Jewish population. And the biggest question actually for me is, if we look at the Bible, if we look at religion as such, is religion a tool for colonization or for liberation? And you know what? In the Bible, Hebrew, New Testament, in the Quran, you can find what? You can find both. I always say, you know, the scriptures are like the bazaar in the old city of Jerusalem. You can find there everything. It depends what you are looking for. And so actually, if you use the Bible for colonization, it doesn't say much about the Bible. It says more about you. And if you find in the Bible a tool for liberation, it says more about you, not about the Bible. And I'm not sure if this is going to work. Yeah. I will run. Maybe this is, I'm not sure if this will work. Okay, I will skip it. But this is actually, it's a short video. It should work.
Maybe if you click once more, it will start.
No. You need to do something there. Anyhow, this is actually a video clip from the Security Council.
Those decrees during the time of the Maccabees, and we will overcome this evil decree today. We have full confidence in the justice of our cause and in the righteousness of our past. We will continue to be a democratic state based on the rule of law and full civil and human rights for all our citizens, and we will continue to be a Jewish state, proudly reclaiming the land of our forefathers, where the Maccabees fought their oppressors and King David ruled from Jerusalem. This holy book, the Bible, contains 3,000 years of history of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. No one can change this history.
So basically here you see the Israeli ambassador at the Security Council after the 15 countries there spoke about that settlements are illegitimate. He comes and says, to the hell with international law, because the Bible gives us the right to continue building settlements in the West Bank. And so you can see how, again, religion is used to legitimize, actually, the policy. Now, I will try to be quick. So if you look at the region, I think we have too much religion. And I say this as a pastor, you know, I'm a pastor, so, and I think sometimes there is so much religion in our region that God himself keeps saying, give me a break, I cannot handle that much religion. I think God would love to live in Netherlands in that sense, rather than in the Middle East. So the problem, we have too much religion, but little, actually, too little spirituality. And we have too much politics. You know, people get politics for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But there is too little care for the polis, for the city, for the town, for the community. Religion is actually currently in our part of the world definitely part of the problem, but religion has also the potential to be part of the solution. I don't think we can solve anything there without having religion as part of the equation. There is no religious answer. So there is not even a theologians, I cannot give an answer. There can be only a political answer, but religion actually can play a role, a positive role. Quickly, I will give just a practice of what the Christian community is doing positively. We have less than 2% of the population Christians. That means inside Israel, 1.3%, in the West Bank, 1.7%. I talked that half of them live in the West Bank and in the Bethlehem region, and there are less than 1,000 Christians left in Gaza, which means we know that within this generation, Christianity will cease to exist in the Gaza Strip. And yet, Christians in Palestine, in a study we did 5 years ago, we found out Christians, although they are less than 2%, they run 1/3 of the health services in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. To give you Jerusalem as an example, in Jerusalem we have 4 hospitals. 3 of them are Christian hospitals. They cater to 250,000 Palestinians, mainly Muslims. And so this is the role of the church in that conflict. But also, even more interesting, we found out that 45% of all non-governmental organizations in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip were started either by churches or by Christians. These are human rights organizations, these are social institutions, etc. In the politics, Christians continue to play an important role there as well. So let me come to the last, and here I will do it very quickly to give you just a taste of Dar al-Kalam University College. Our mission there is to educate the next generation of creative leaders for Palestine, and we chose not religion nor politics as tool for social transformation, but arts and culture. Many people think, why arts and culture? But this is what we chose, because that provides like a common ground where people of different political, religious affiliations can come together. And so education for employment is important. I will skip that. Maybe just few success story. This is Haneen. Haneen, as you can see, she's a Palestinian Muslim. She's a first generation students, so the first one from her family to go to college, which is a bit unusual in Palestine because most of the Palestinians have gone to universities. And she lives in this small village called Jubb al-Deeb. And if you remember the first map of Bethlehem, there were the 4 Israeli settlements in the middle of nowhere. Remember that one? These are the Jewish settlements. So the Jewish settlements, they control all the land around this small, tiny village with 140 people living there. And because the Israeli settlements control the whole area, they are not allowing the village to have electricity. And so imagine in the 21st century, Haneen has to learn with candle lights at night, in the 21st century. So Jewish human rights organizations from Holland, actually, from here, donated to the small village solar panels. And suddenly there was light. I'm sure you read about it here in the newspaper. And so Haneen was happy she could study at night with lights on. But then one night the Israeli soldiers came and confiscated the solar panels, which was donated by, Jewish Europeans with EU money, saying the village is not allowed to have electricity. And so what do you do? Haneen, as a young creative leader, actually started organizing the women of that village, her mom, her aunt, very strong women. And they went to the Israeli High Court and demanded for the solar panels to get back. Here you can see in the Independent the story. And actually they succeeded. So the village has again light. And Haneen actually now is a teacher of art, teaching all the villages around there, kids there art. And by the way, after tomorrow is her wedding. So I will miss it because I will be here. Another success story, Wissam. Wissam comes from the largest refugee camp in Bethlehem, the Dheisheh refugee camp. Maybe some of you have been there. And he graduated last year in filmmaking. Haneen was contemporary art, Wissam. And Wissam actually, this year, just 3 months ago, won the 3rd prize in Cannes Film Festival. Out of 2,000 student films from all over the countries, including Holland, the first jury chose 17, and he was one of the 17. And then the second jury out of the 17, they chose the best 3, and he was number 3. And so imagine from the refugee camp to the red carpet. This is actually what our university is trying to do. You can look at the trial, it's called Ambiance. It tells the story of the village, of the refugee camp, but in a very successful way. Another success story now, this is a Palestinian Christian young woman, Hani. Hani grew up in our Sunday school, in our church in Bethlehem, and her vision was to play football. Now, at that time, 14 years ago, football was only for boys. But Hani is a very stubborn, strong woman. She said, no, I want to play soccer as a girl. And so she started actually the first female soccer team, football team in Palestine. Today we have 22 football teams in Palestine, thanks actually to Hani. And Hani became the first captain of the Palestinian football national team. And she was so good that 4 years ago, FIFA recruited her from us to be their ambassador for peace through sport. So she travels over the world. She competes with me, who is having more miles. I will skip this, but this is maybe... we created the Christian Academic Forum for Citizenship in the Arab world to engage the Christians in the academia, but also Muslims in creating a city based on equality. Kairos Palestine, the ecumenical movement that tried actually to say the Bible is a book of liberation, not occupation. And we started 3 years ago the network of Christian seminaries and Muslim religious colleges in the Arab world. So I will end with this. If you think of the first part, you think of the maps. The maps are telling us as Palestinians we will not have life, and definitely it's not going to be abundant. But we want to listen to what this countryman, a Palestinian Jew, said 2,000 years ago, that he came that we might have life and have it abundantly. And this is actually what we stand for. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Would you like to have a seat? I thought you could sit in the middle.
Wow, like the throne between two roses. I mean, I'm not used to this.
Thanks a lot. That was very informative, and I was very happy that you ended with these success stories that gave us,
some hope.
Yes, some hope, a positive feeling. Let me start with you, Helene. Your research field is a study, amongst others, the study of Christian minorities in the Middle East. From your perspective, from your expertise, if you listen to Mitri Raheb's story, what struck you most?
I think there's always this similarity between the position of the Palestinian Christians with Christians all over the Middle East. So on the one hand, it's part of the bigger problem of how the Middle East in general deals with minorities, with issues of the bigger groups and the smaller groups. So on the one hand, there's all these similarities, the patterns of migration, the issues, the economic issues, also the success stories. Also in other Middle Eastern countries, Christians have been among those who started the hospitals and who made sure there was education, etc. So on the one hand...
Why is that? Why is that?
Well, that's a long story. It has to do with missions, with earlier modernization than some of the other groups, with a more openness also to Western forms of knowledge, etc. So it's a long story, and it's not as it has changed. I mean, there are many groups from among the Muslims who have caught up, so to say. Right. So things are changing now, and in a positive way, in the sense that many more groups are participating in this. But this is so. There's the general issues in which the Christian Palestinians are very similar to Christians anywhere else in the world. But at the same time, the Palestinian situation is also very specific, and there's very specific problems that are really unique. Also in the difficult sense to the Palestinians and the Palestinian Christians, with the double issues of both dealing with Muslims and especially with the fundamentalist Muslims in their own society, dealing with the Israeli context and the Israeli occupation of Palestine. So there are things which are different and more acute than for some of the others. Of course, there are other. We're not going to discuss about all of the Middle East, so that will take us to too many different places. But so I think on the one hand, it's unfortunately for me, it's a familiar story. But it struck me again how that has struck me from Christians all over the region. Also, how can I put that? On the one hand, the vulnerability, and on the other hand, really the persistence and the vibrancy and the will to make something happen. And that's, for me, has always been also the. Sometimes people ask me, why do you continue to work on Christians in the Middle East? It's so depressing. But it's not. Sometimes it's depressing because sometimes the stories are very depressing and the migration and communities getting smaller. But every time also for me there is this positive side because I see how these communities in many ways are an example for other communities, how they deal with the problems, how they manage to make something of a situation which is very difficult and which is very harsh. And many of these Christians make something of it, whether they stay or whether they go. Yes. It's on both sides. So that makes me still very much kind of connected and interested in what's happening.
Sure, yes. Yeah. I see you nodding. Where do you get the strength and the vibration to keep on going?
Actually, in my case, it's the young people. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I look at Haneen, when I look at Wissam and so on, this is maybe one of few things that are giving me that strength.
Yes.
You know, this is why between us, I know it's not between us, really. You know, but sometimes like working with church structures, it can become very boring. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, church politics is politics.
Yes.
And so it's really with the young people when I see how we can transform their lives. Mm-hmm. This is where I get my hope. And remember, I come from Palestine, where the cross and resurrection are so close together. So you have this suffering and you have the hope like in no other place. In a very concentrated manner.
I mean, they can't be separated.
I mean, I hope one day we can. I mean, I don't love suffering, but
no, sure.
But this is the reality.
Yes. I read an interview with you in a newspaper, and you said the most important question in the Bible is, where is God? Can you explain that? Why is that the most important question for you?
Because, you know, when you live under occupation, when you live under colonization, and it's not only the question of the Palestinians, I mean, this is worldwide. The empire behaves like God. I mean, you know, they are all powerful. They can do what they want. They can change the legal structures, you know. And you feel you cannot do much about it. Mm-hmm. And you feel that God has forsaken you. Mm-hmm. Because the empire plays the role of God. And so you feel, you know, that. And so you ask yourself, this is the question we have throughout the Bible, where are you, God? I mean, think of the Psalms. There are so many Psalms that start like this. Where are you, God? Why are you so silent? Why don't you move a finger? Why don't you come to rescue us? And this is why actually, if you think of the cross, that was the last words of Jesus on the cross. My God, why did you forsake me? Because the Roman Empire crushed him. Mm-hmm. And so he resonated that same question of the people of the land.
Yes. Helene, would you say the Bible is a political document?
The Bible is many things. I echo your... So yes, at places it is a political document, but in a way that we not always can kind of reconstruct, because, I mean, it was written in so many different places and different times, so some parts definitely were also political documents, and which allows us also to read it sometimes as a political document, but in all kinds of different ways. As you say, it can be used to justify all kinds of unjust situations, and it can be used to empower the powerless, and it can go both ways. Well, you can say, unfortunately, but that's. I think it's the reason the Bible is being read until today, because it's such a powerful book with so many different ways of reading it.
But also leading to so many different perspectives and conflicts.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's no way, quick way out of that, unfortunately.
I mean, I don't think there is any apolitical, non-political reading of anything. And I'm usually afraid of those who pretend to say our reading is non-political, because usually these are the most political readings. Maybe
Why is that?
I say, I mean, there is no contextless theology. Theology is always connected to context. When I studied in Germany, and believe me, I never went, when I was at university, I never went to anything on contextual theology. Because hearing my professors reading between the lines, it sounded like Germans were doing real theology. But people in subtropical areas, they do contextual theology. And it's not really kosher theology, And now, later in my life, I came to realize there are no contextless theologians. There are only theologians who already know that what they are doing is contextual, and those who don't know yet, we have to teach them.
Yes, no, I completely agree.
So if we focus on a specific interpretation of reading the Bible, the one the Zionist, for example, reading of it, why exactly what theological reasons are there for Christians to say, the Jewish people should all move to Israel?
Wow, this is a very difficult question. I think that those Christians are really not sure of their faith. They need a sign that God is still working. And for them, Israel is the sign. And you can read that in so many texts of post-Holocaust theologians, not only of Christian theologians. I think this is one. But secondly, I think if you look carefully, sometimes I feel, and sorry to say it this way, sometimes I feel that, these Christian Zionists, they loved European Jews so much that they want to send all of them to Palestine. You know what I mean?
No.
I mean, they really couldn't allow for a pluralistic society and for Jews to be full equal citizens in those contexts. And so and I can give you examples. I have written about this, Basically, they are saying, you don't belong here, you belong there. Yes. And I think this is, for me, this is actually racism.
Yes. And I think maybe you've mentioned it already, but not so explicitly. I think one of the theological reasons also that if the Holy Land really belongs to the Jews, then Christ can return.
Exactly, and that's actually the theology that was started in the 19th century with Darby, that he connected actually the establishment of a Jewish state as a prerequisite for Christ to come back. And these people are actually anxious for Armageddon. And if you look through their writings, and there are lots of research, in the 60s they thought that, there is just one verse in the book of Jeremiah that talks about the danger coming from the north. And so who were the north? It was the Russians. And then they changed in the 90s, it was Saddam Hussein. And Saddam was gone, now it's Iran. And so they keep, and it's a business. It's a business. And unfortunately, it fits in the militarization ideology of the United States. They want to sell more weapons, and they help them.
Yes. Yes, because you said if there would be no international support for the state of Israel, then the situation would be completely different.
Right. I don't mind giving support to the state of Israel. I mind giving support to the continuation of the occupation. Because at the end of the day, I mean, you know, there is no other option but for Israeli and Palestinians, Jews, Christians, and Muslims to share the land.
Yes.
It's just, do we share it in a way that we live and we let live, or do we share it in a way that the one group will have everything and the others are the have-not?
Yes.
Yeah.
We don't have a controversy here. You know, we have to create one.
No. I'm thinking of so many things where to go from here. I think that the point you touched upon about these specific conservative Christian groups, why they are so anxious to put everything on the Jewish return and the Jewish state. I think the issue of not wanting them to have them in Europe is part of it, also via the sense of course of the Holocaust, the whole fact that this happened in Europe and that Christian theologians rightly felt co-responsible for the fact that it happened, made people want to think of a way to remedy that and to atone for the European sins.
Right.
And in fact, the Christian Zionists, in a sense, were late in getting to that, and then also included the whole eschatology and the Armageddon thing. But there's this confluence from both liberal or mainstream theologians who very rightly needed to come to terms with the fact that Christian theology contributed to the Holocaust, and very rightly there had to be done, and that had to be thought through. But that then, with the establishment of the state, etc., all came together in this very uncritical support of everything that happens, and not just the fact that there's a home for Jews, but so many more things. And the fact that this guilt is part of it makes it so difficult to talk about it.
Yeah, I guess also in Holland and Germany especially. But I agree with you to a great extent. I think bad conscience, guilt plays a role. And I think definitely theologians, Christian theologians, had to repent for lots of anti-Judaism that is happening, basically looking at Jews down as inferior or something. I think this is part of where we need to do our homework. I think the problem, how I see it today at least, I'm starting to see, I mean, when I talk sometimes to friends, I'm starting to see that the problem actually is somewhere else. The church in the first half of the 20th century, but also before, it is easier for the church always, and not only the church, religions, to side with those in power. It's always a minority that dare actually to challenge those in power. And so the church in Germany, you know, it was easier to go with Hitler. Because, you know, if you dare to challenge Hitler, you will be Bonhoeffer.
Yes. You'll be Bonhoeffer.
Right?
Yes.
Your life will end.
Yeah.
Because the empire can crush you. And so I see today similar things. So I don't believe that people learned anything from history. I think it's actually a continuation that the majority are still siding with those in power, and it's only the minority who are ready to pay the costly price of being prophetic.
So it's all about fear mainly.
I think so.
Yes. Yes. Well, I think we have 5 more minutes to talk about the solution of this problem. But I remember, Helene, when we had a conversation a few weeks ago to discuss this evening, you said, well, there's an easy solution. So tell us.
Okay. Let me write, you know.
No, it was on your list. I mean, I didn't come with any, but when we were talking about it, for me, it's clear also that the two-state solution is not the solution anymore, and there's no way going back to that. So indeed, I said, and I will bring that up in conversation, a one-state solution. Of course, there's only one way to go forward. But of course, I know, I'm very much aware of all the problems to get there, and at this point it's unimaginable. No, it's not unimaginable. I can imagine a one-state that functions in many.
What should it look like, the one-state solution?
You
have one government, and everyone is an equal citizen under the same government, and the government will be.
Why not?
Yeah. Okay. Just no.
I mean, you know why not?
More explanation. That's all.
No, I mean, I can think of millions of reasons why not. Of course, there are all kinds of practical hindrances why that wouldn't work. Both on say the Palestinian Islamic side, on the Jewish. There's all kinds of reasons why this wouldn't work in one way or another. But many countries, not all countries, but many countries manage to do that and share land and share resources and not sectarianize, because that's the other way around. Then you go to a Lebanese or an Iraqi situation or whatever, where you cantonize and say we have all different groups and we think of rules, how many votes this one gets and how many, and that's probably that would be a workable intermediate solution. But I don't think, looking at Lebanon, for example, that's a solution that's going to work long term, because people want other things.
Yes.
So, yeah, but I'm
an
outsider. I'm not telling what it.
I mean, it's. Let me try to answer it differently, because I said there are these 5. Whatever the solution, we cannot compromise on few things. We cannot compromise on equality. So I, as a theologian, cannot defend any system that gives Jews more right than Christians, Israeli more right than Palestinians, or Muslims more right than Christians, or Christians more right than... So for me, equality is a value.
Yes.
You can call it Christian value, you can call it human values, you can call it whatever, Dutch value, whatever. It's a value we cannot compromise on, so that's one. Secondly, we need to realize that identity is an important issue in all of this. So, Jews need to feel that they have space to develop their identity the way they want, and nobody will interfere in that. The same is also for us. So identity is important. So we have to think of this, because otherwise I think you miss the point. And the third is, cooperation. I mean, we really cannot live in, walled in, walled out. I mean, who's walled in, who's walled out at the end of the day. So basically, cooperation between Israeli and Palestinian is crucial, but also regional cooperation would be important, because the time for small countries to survive on their own, I think, is over. And so for me, these are the 3 ingredients. Now, as theologians, I'm very flexible, as long as they 3. So it could be 2 states, it could be 1 state, it could be my favorite would be the Swiss model, not the Swiss cheese, because the Swiss, I think, now over 700 years, they were able to think of equality, identity. So you have German-speaking, and you have French-speaking, and you have Italian-speaking, and you have, and it's still a federal state. So if I were, I would push for that. But again, I think when people today still talk about a 2-state solution, they feel if we miss this opportunity now, we have to wait maybe for another generation for a 1 state to...